This is a 1990 Ford F-150 four-wheel drive, and I'm replacing the steering column. I've got a new one from a friend's truck down here, and I'm replacing it because the old one has a lot of up and down slop. The wheel is extremely loose and it's bad. So the first step is to remove the knobs off the headlight and the wiper switch. There's a notch on each one like that, and there's a metal tab behind there, and you just stick a small screwdriver in there and pull that tab towards the knob, and then just pull the knob off. Okay, so now this trim just pops off. Just reach behind it and pull on it a bit. Now this one is actually held on with a bolt right there. Okay, this bolt is a 7mm head. So then this plastic should just come off also by pulling on it. If it's still installed in your truck, go ahead and remove the fuse panel cover and set that off to the side. So now we have access underneath. There's a bunch of bolts on that big aluminum bracket, and then there's a clip around the steering column right at the firewall. Normally there would be a bolt through here, however this one's missing the bolt. And then also there's bolts holding this plate on. This one, and I believe there's one more up above the column. Those bolts will have to come out, and that'll give access through the firewall. Alright, these big bolts holding the aluminum bracket on are 14mm heads. Now it helps here to put some upward pressure on the steering column to relieve the weight off of these bolts as you remove them, because these two on the sides are the ones that hold the weight of the column up. Okay, now that bracket just falls out of place, and then now the steering column should come down. See how it's fallen about 3 inches or so here. Now there's some wires and things to disconnect next. Okay, to get access to remove this white wire, looks like we have to pull off this ring of trim that goes around, and there's 2 Phillips screws on the bottom, one on this side and one on that side. So we should be able to remove those and then pop that trim off. Alright, with those 2 screws removed, this piece just pulls right off, and then this piece is loose and it comes right off the top. That's what the screws look like. They're just 2 long Phillips. Now this wire goes up underneath and around to this white clip right here. I believe that is for the automatic transmission, for the indicator for which gear it's in, park, reverse, neutral, drive. Alright, this is a 1/4 inch head bolt. It's very short. So now with that removed. I have to lift up on the column. Set it on my leg here. It looks like there's a Phillips head screw on the top. Let's see if that should remove the bracket that the wire is tied to. So maybe you don't have to remove the white plastic piece. We'll see. Okay, so that looks like you have to remove both. So with this lifted up, you can slide this white plastic up into a notch and then pull it out. So now this is free. Alright, now there's a wiring harness on each side. This one needs to come undone. Let's see. Looks like there's a clip on each side of it on the long ends. You should be able to pry it up with a screwdriver. Just kind of work it on each side as you go. Alright, so each of those are unclipped now. So now it's just a matter of pulling it apart. There we go. Alright, now the second wiring harness is on the top of the steering column. It's this large harness, which is for the ignition switch. Okay, instead of pulling this wiring harness, there are two nuts holding it on the back. I'm going to just try removing those to pull this whole assembly off, rather than trying to reach in there and unplug it, because that's very difficult to reach. So we'll see if this works. So I got the first one off already, there's the second one. Okay, so it looks like this comes off, so that's perfect. So that's a lot easier than trying to unplug that harness. So that'll go off to the side, and that rod is connected to the ignition key, the ignition switch. Next thing is removing the bolts that hold on the bracket on the firewall, and those are 7/16 head. Now there's one on the top left here. Now there's one over on top right. And then there's one last bolt on the top at the very middle. so now you can see that is all removed. There's the top one up there. And then normally there is a bolt that goes through this metal ring. You just have to loosen that. However, this one was missing the bolt, so I don't have to do that. Okay, I think everything on the inside is disassembled now. So now in the engine bay, the automatic transmissions have a bracket, that S-shaped bracket right there with the hole in the end. Normally there would be some linkage attached to that bracket for the transmission shifter. However, since this truck has had a manual swap, that linkage is gone. So unfortunately I'm not sure how to remove that linkage, but I believe that you would have to do that if your transmission is an automatic. Okay, unfortunately we had to remove the steering column off camera, but there is a 13mm bolt that goes through this split joint here. Remove that bolt, and then you have to rotate the steering column counterclockwise from the inside, or clockwise from the outside, so that the automatic transmission bracket goes upright. That way you can fit it through the hole in the firewall, and then just give the column some decent pulls to get the shaft to come out of the split joint here. Fortunately ours just slid out. We didn't have to pound this at all, but if yours is stuck, then you may have to pound this joint apart a bit, or torch it, or put some penetrating oil and things like that on there. But once you get that bolt out, then it should just slide out, and then it just pulls straight out of the inside, and then you put your doing in. Okay, now I have the new steering column, and now I'm just going to try to slip it into place a bit. Okay, I have that stuck through the firewall. And now on this new column, we did cut the automatic transmission bracket off. You can see. We cut it right in the middle there. So now I just gotta get this shaft lined up. Okay, now we're installing the new column, and I cleaned up the end of the column with a wire wheel and put some lube on it so that it'll hopefully slide into this U-joint better. But now I have to tap it in place with a piece of wood. Okay, looks like it went most of the way. Okay, with the shaft pounded all the way on, we turned the steering wheel a bit to get access to the hole for the bolt. So now I'm just gonna stick it in and then tighten it down. It should be a 13mm head. Alright, now going back inside of the truck, the first step that I'm going to do is to put the bolts back around this plate in the firewall. And right now, this plate is too low, so what I'm doing is I've got a pry bar resting on the top of the brake pedal, and then I've got the end of it underneath that plate, so I can just push up on it and line up the bolts. You may have to rotate the column, the inner part of the column a bit to line up the plate. I got one started on the bottom, so it'll help support the weight. Now I can try to tweak this a little bit as needed. Alright, with all those bolts tightened in, We're gonna wait to tighten that ring clamp down until the column is up and mounted in position. So now I gotta put the transmission, or what would be the transmission, in the park position so that I can shut the key off, and that way this rod will be lined up in the proper spot, because when I took off that switch, the rod was in the off position. Now I'll get the bolt holes lined up on the switch, and this rod needs to be over right, sitting in this little notch here. Now I'm looking underneath it to see if it actually goes into the hole in the electrical switch. Okay, looks like it went into place. Let me just make sure. Yep. Okay, so everything is in place now with that. So now it's just time to put the nuts back on. Make sure the plug is still on there tightly. Yep. Okay, I'm not going to make this too tight. I don't think there's any reason to. Just make them snug so that it won't rattle loose or anything. Okay, good. Okay, now we're going to get the big gray wiring harness plugged in. Okay, the clicks weren't very loud, but it did snap into place. Looks like both sides of the clips are fully connected. Just give it one last to make sure it's plugged in, and that's good. Okay, now I'm going to install the big aluminum bracket with the circle cutout, or this cutout facing the front of the truck. I'm going to just kind of tuck this big wire underneath the middle, and then get these bolt holes lined up. Okay, now I'm going to just lift this into place, and I'm going to try to get the two bolts started. You may have to pull the column back towards you or push it back in towards the front of the vehicle or so to get it lined up properly. With the bolt holes, I have to pull it back towards me. That's why you don't want to tighten that snap ring, or that ring clamp on the end of the column yet. Now you can install this automatic transmission little wire here. I'm not going to, because I don't have an automatic transmission. I'm just going to cut it off, but now would be the time to do that, I believe. Now, one thing to keep in mind, I just noticed that the attachment system for that little wire for the gear shift indicator the attachment system is slightly different on this new column. And this column is from an F250, whereas this truck I'm putting it in is an F150. So far, that's the only difference I've noticed between the 3/4 ton and the half-ton steering column. So just keep that in mind. It might not be exactly the same. Alright, I ended up dropping the column back down. I took these two bolts out so that I could get this plastic trim on here and started. It's still a bit loose now, just because I don't know exactly where I'm going to want to tighten it down once it's up into place. Alright, now with these bolts back in a little bit, I've got this trim tightened into place, and now I'm just going to tighten the rest of the bolts holding on the aluminum bracket. Wipers work. Everything seems to work. I'm gonna try starting it real quick. Okay, so everything seems to work properly with the ignition. So now it's time to put all the trim back on. So I'll start with this side. Just pop it into place. And then there's one screw on the bottom middle. Just make that snug. Make sure all the clips are clipped. And then we'll put this piece back on. Now, before I put the knobs back on, I'm going to tighten this, or put the bolt into this snap ring. I suppose you could do that before you put any of the trim on, just to make sure there's no issues. Okay, to get this bolt lined up, I'm going to use a pair of vice grips to squeeze the two tabs together a bit until I can get the bolt started properly. That's fairly tight. Alright, now to install the wiper button and the headlight button, or headlight knob. Just line up the clip, see how it's a D shape. There's one flat side on the shaft that it goes onto. So just line up the flat part of the clip with the flat part of the shaft and just push it on. Seems to be on all the way. Okay, and then the same thing for the headlight knob. It's a triangle shaped shaft, so it looks like you can stick it on anyway, just so long as the triangle part lines up. There we go. Okay, everything works good. Alright, now the fuse cover can go back on. One thing you may have noticed is that the old steering column had cruise control. However, this engine has been replaced and it wasn't set up with cruise, so it doesn't matter. I actually prefer not having the buttons since they didn't work anyway. As far as I know, there wouldn't be any difference in the process, assuming that cruise worked and it still had buttons. So everything seems to work. Okay, that should be the whole process. The new steering wheel is very tight now. There's no slop. No, I'll show you that it does turn this, actually turn the tires. So, everything works. I hope this was helpful.